Shocker the century Stephen Miller humiliated in CNN debate showdown. Jasmine Crockett's explosive takedown leaves him speechless and running buckle up. Because what happened in that CNN debate studio was nothing short of a political earthquake that shook the nation to its core. Stephen Miller, the smug, self-assured former Trump advisor, strutted into the room with his trademark icy arrogance, thinking he was about to wipe the floor with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett on immigration policy. But in just 30 seconds, his world crumbled. Crockett, armed with a stack of damning documents and a razor-sharp intellect, didn't just debate him. She destroyed him, leaving Miller a stammering, sweating mess in front of millions. This was a debate. This was a masterclass in accountability, a public reckoning for a man who thought he was untouchable. Here's the jaw-dropping story of how Jasmine Crockett turned Stephen Miller's worst nightmare into reality. Live on national television, the setup: Miller's fatal miscalculation. Stephen Miller walked into the CNN studio like he owned the place. His pale complexion seemed to glow unnaturally under the bright studio lights, his dark suit crisp, his posture radiating cold confidence. At 38, Miller had built a reputation as the architect of Trump's most hardline immigration policies that sparked outrage, separated families, and made headlines for years. A Harvard law graduate, he carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed no one could outsmart him. He'd been on countless news shows, steamrolling opponents with rapid-fire statistics, legal jargon, and a condescending smirk that made his rivals look small. Backstage, just 10 minutes before the debate, Miller was in his element, barking orders at his team and laughing off his opponent, Jasmine Crockett. He scoffed, adjusting his tie. She's just another progressive who's all feelings and no facts. I'm going to school her on immigration policy in front of the whole country. His team nodded, eagerly feeding his ego. They had handpicked Crockett as his opponent, thinking she'd be an easy target, a freshman congresswoman from Texas with a reputation for fiery speeches. But in their minds, no real substance. This will be great for your media profile. His communications director had told him earlier that day, you'll crush her. But Miller had made a catastrophic mistake. He didn't know who he was dealing with. Jasmine Crockett, at 33, wasn't just a politician. She was a former civil rights attorney who'd spent over a decade fighting immigration cases in Texas courtrooms. She'd represented hundreds of families torn apart by the very policies Miller had crafted in the White House. Unlike the talking heads Miller was used to bullying on cable news, Crockett didn't rely on talking points. She lived and breathed immigration law. She'd seen the human cost of Miller's policies up close: mothers sobbing in court, children lost in the system, families shattered. And she'd been waiting for this moment. As the cameras rolled, the studio buzzed with anticipation. Miller sat back in his chair, legs crossed, a smug grin on his face, ready to deliver what he thought would be a masterclass in immigration policy. Across from him, Crockett was calm, her professional blazer perfectly pressed, a thick stack of documents neatly arranged in front of her. Miller barely noticed the papers. He was too busy mentally rehearsing his opening attack. But Crockett wasn't just prepared, she was armed, and she was about to unleash a storm that would leave Miller scrambling for cover. The opening salvo Crockett sets the trap. The debate began with Anderson Cooper's introduction, his voice steady as he welcomed the audience to what he called a critical discussion on immigration policy. Miller leaned forward, ready to dominate. Crockett, meanwhile, looked directly into the camera with a slight, knowing smile. Before we start, she said, her voice warm but commanding, I want to ask everyone watching at home to comment below, tell us where you're from, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to see is going to be unforgettable. Miller rolled his eyes, dismissing her words as cheap social media theatrics. He'd seen this before: politicians pandering to the crowd with flashy gimmicks. He had no idea that Crockett had spent the last 3 days poring over documents that would unravel his entire narrative. Those papers in front of her, they weren't props, they were dynamite, and she was about to light the fuse. Cooper kicked things off with seemingly straightforward question about border security. Miller seized the opportunity, launching into his well-rehearsed routine. His voice was sharp, dripping with condescension, as he gestured dramatically with his pale hands. Anderson, what we're seeing at the border is a complete failure of Democratic policies. He began, when I was in the White House, we had the most secure border in American history. We implemented policies based on law and order, not emotion or political correctness. He turned to Crockett, his trademark smirk creeping across his face. Now we have the congresswoman here, who I'm sure means well, but she simply doesn't understand the complexities of immigration law. These progressive talking points might play well on Twitter, but they don't work in the real world. The studio audience stirred. Miller supporters in the crowd nodded approvingly, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Cooper tried to give Crockett a chance to respond, but Miller wasn't done. "Let me give you some real numbers, Congresswoman." He continued, pulling out his phone, as if he was about to bury her in statistics. "During our administration, illegal border crossings dropped by 85%. We implemented remain. In Mexico, we built the wall. And we enforced the law. Can you say the same about your party's policies?" Miller leaned back, clearly expecting Crockett to fumble with some generic response about compassion or human rights. That was his playbook, hit hard with numbers, overwhelmed with jargon, and watch his opponent crumble. But Crockett didn't flinch. She just smiled, opened her folder, and said, "Mr. Miller, I appreciate your confidence." Her voice was steady, professional, almost disarmingly polite. "But before we talk about your statistics, I think the American people deserve to know about some of your actual policies, not the talking points, the real documents." The bombshell. Crockett drops the hammer. Miller's expression flickered. Something in Crockett's tone told him this wasn't going to be his usual cakewalk. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice losing a fraction of its earlier swagger. Crockett didn't hesitate. She pulled out a document and held up for the cameras. "This is a memo you wrote in July 2019, internal White House communications. Would you like me to read from it?" The studio fell deathly silent. Miller's face went from confident to confused, with the first hint of panic creeping into his eyes. His team had never prepared him for an opponent who had actual documentation. "I'm not sure what game you're playing here," he said. "Try to regain control, but I'm not going to respond out of context documents that could be fabricated." That was his second mistake. Crockett's smile widened. "Fabricated." She repeated, her voice laced with just enough incredulity to make Miller squirm. "Mr. Miller, this came directly from the National Archives. It's part of the public record now. But let me ask you this. Do you remember writing about acceptable losses when it came to family separation?" The audience gasped audibly. Miller's face, already pale, seemed to drain of what little color it had left. He started, "Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe."